If you turn to Genesis chapter 43. And in Genesis chapter 43, we're going to read verses 16 through 23. So for those of you who can and will, let us stand for the reading of God's Word. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of his house, "Bring these men home, and slay, and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon." And the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men into Joseph's house. And the men were afraid, because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, "Because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time are we brought in, that he may seek occasion against us, and fall upon us, and take us for bondmen, and our asses." And they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they communed with him at the door of the house, and said, "O sir, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food, and it came to pass when we came to the inn, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again into our hand. And other money have we brought down in our hands to buy food. We cannot tell who put our money in our sacks." Actually, I'm going to leave off on read verse 23 just yet. You may be seated. Give you a little background. Now, during most of our nation's history, or a good part of it, most people would probably be somewhat familiar with the name Joseph. And they would be, familiar with the coat of many colors, and they would be familiar with his brothers selling him into slavery. He was sold into Egypt. And he was bought by a man by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar's wife kept making passes at Joseph, and Joseph, of course, kept declining. And at some point, Potiphar's wife claimed that he tried to lie with her, that he tried to force her. And so Potiphar took Joseph and put him in prison. Joseph spent a number of years there in prison. But then Pharaoh had what he thought was a couple of dreams. As Joseph would tell him later, it was actually one dream. And in this dream, Pharaoh saw 7 fat kine, meaning cows. He also saw 7 very ill-favored, sickly cows, if you will. And these 7 ill-favored cows ate the 7 healthy ones. But when they ate the 7 healthy ones, you couldn't tell any difference in their appearance. They were still ill and lean-favored. He woke up, and this is the reason Pharaoh thought he had had a second dream. When he dreamed again, he saw 7 stalks of corn. And 7 of them were healthy, and then he seen another 7 that wasn't. And the 7 that wasn't ate the 7 that was, again with no change in appearance. And he went to his magicians, or had his magicians come to him, and he told them the dream. They couldn't explain it. They couldn't interpret it. So Joseph was brought out of prison. And Joseph made it known that he he wasn't the one interpreting the dream. It was God. He gave God the credit for it. But he did explain it to Pharaoh. He said, the 7 healthy, if you will, the 7 fat cows represented 7 years of plenty, as well as the 7 ears of corn, or the 7 stalks, that they represented the years of plenty. And then the 7 ill-favored cows and the 7 bad-off stalks of corn, they represented 7 years of famine. So Joseph explained this to Pharaoh. Well, Pharaoh ends up putting Joseph in charge of all the land of Egypt and over everyone except for himself. Joseph was in command over everything except for Pharaoh. And with this, once the 7 years of plenty ran out and you get into the famine, Jacob sends some of his sons into Egypt to buy food, to buy corn. He keeps Benjamin back. He doesn't let Benjamin go. Benjamin's the youngest of the brothers, and he keeps Benjamin at home. And when the brothers get there into Egypt, Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize Joseph. And Joseph accuses them of being spies. And so he puts them in ward, he puts them in prison. And he comes back after 3 days and he says to them, one of you stays and the other goes home, and you bring me your youngest brother back, and that'll tell me whether you're telling the truth or not. Well, the brothers, they leave Simon behind. The rest of them are heading back home. They stop at an inn. And one of the brothers opens up his sack, and there's the money that was supposed to be paid for the food on his part. Well, when they get back to Jacob, when they open all their sacks, all their money is there. And they tell Jacob what they've been told, and Jacob refuses. No, you're not taking Benjamin. You're not, I've already lost Joseph. You're not taking Benjamin. And with that, there's a very interesting verse back in chapter 42. And it's actually before they're still at the inn. It's before they get back to Jacob, and it's chapter 42 and verse 28. And he said unto his brethren, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God hath done unto us? That last statement in that verse. What is this that God hath done unto us? They couldn't see the blessing. They saw a curse. They saw a curse. They couldn't see the blessing, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is being able to see the blessing during hardships. And, what are things that can keep us from seeing our blessings? And with that, I will read verse 23 of chapter 43. Now at this point, before I read this verse, Jacob has finally relented. They've run out of the food that they've brought back to Egypt. And Jacob finally relents and says, yeah, y'all can go back, and he's relented. You can take Benjamin with you. And as they are back in Egypt, they see Joseph's steward. And they're afraid. They've brought the money that they had in the first place back with them. Of course, they've brought more money with them. They've also, by Jacob's request, brought gifts. They brought gifts for Joseph, of course, not even knowing that he's Joseph. But in verse 23, and he said, this is the steward speaking, and he said, peace be to you, fear not. Your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money. And he brought Simon out unto them. And this really brings us to the point of this message this evening. A blessing can come in times of trouble. And sometimes we don't, we tend to see the blessing. If you went home this evening and there was a knock on the door, you went to the door and there was Publishers Clearinghouse with a great big check for you, you'd see the blessing pretty easy there, wouldn't you? The truth is there's blessing in the midst of trouble. There's blessing in the midst of hardships. There's blessing for God's children always. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 23, we've got a promise from God. And God says, Romans chapter 8 verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose. Now we know all things aren't good. I mean, if any one of us went to the doctor tomorrow and the doctor told us we had cancer, we know that's not good news. But the promise is that God's going to work all things together for good. Of course, that's for those that love God and to them who are the called according to His purpose. So you have to be washed in Jesus' most holy, precious blood. You have to be saved. For this promise, this is the promise to us. This ain't the promise to the world. This is the promise to the saved. And so in the midst of troubles, we can have this. And the first statement that this steward makes is, peace be to you. And the thought that God brought to me was when Jesus said to His disciples when He first appeared to them after the resurrection, peace be unto you. And the reason that statement is so powerful or one of the reasons that statement is so powerful is because, well, there's a couple. One we can look at and we know because the disciples fled. Of course, this is an opinion, but they might have been worried. I mean, here's the risen Lord now. He's back, and we fled. But I think it's bigger than that. I think it goes way beyond that. Because we're sinners. And as last week, sin is the transgression of God's law. And sin separates us from God. And sin is a declaration of war against God. And so when Jesus said, peace be unto you, isn't that just like God? We declare war against God with our sin, and God declares peace unto us. And that's what He done right there. And here this steward of Joseph says, peace be to you. That's his response. He knows these men are scared. I mean, they know who Joseph, they don't know he's their brother, but they know he's the most powerful figure in Egypt they've dealt with, that only Pharaoh's more powerful. That whatever Joseph's word is, goes. And this steward says to them, peace be to you. And then he adds to that, fear not. I love those fear nots. Donna can tell you I love those fear nots in the Word of God. And I've been told there's 365 of those fear nots in the Word of God. And of course, we can take that and say, well, that's one for every day of the year. But I think that's 365 for every day of the year, because they're all there. And, it really it doesn't make sense. And some of you have heard me say this. It doesn't make sense to be worried. It doesn't make sense to be afraid. Those of us that's been washed in Jesus' most holy and precious blood, we've trusted God. We've put our faith, which means our trust in Him for our eternity. So our entire eternity, which means without end, we've trusted God with. Well, what's going to come up today that's bigger than that? And we're all guilty. I'm guilty of it. I know God's blessed me. God's blessed me in a whole lot of ways, and one of those ways is when I sense that nervousness or that fear or that worry come on me, pretty quick thereon, God brings the thought to me, hand it to me. And there's that peace that comes with that. So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you I never worry. I'd be lying if I did. But what a wonderful peace and what a wonderful joy it is that God takes that from me. That in the midst of whatever's going on, that joy is there. The blessing is there. But we can let fear, we can let worry rob us of the blessings that God's got for us. Let us not do that. And He said, "Peace be to you, fear not." And then this next two statements, your God and the God of your father. Start with the first one there, your God. Now these brothers of Joseph, they weren't what we would call good men. And if you don't want to take my word for it, and it ain't just because they sold Joseph off. You can go through and read about these men. And they're not good. They're not good men. But this steward says of them, your God. That tells me, as flawed as they are, they're God's men. They were descendants of Abraham. They're descendants of Isaac. They're obviously descendants of their father Jacob. These are the patriarchs. This is the people that God is creating a nation through to first and foremost bring the Messiah, to bring Jesus to the world through. And in addition to that, and just like with the church, the children of Israel failed a whole lot, just like the church does. We're supposed to be that light that shines in this dark world, that the rest of the world can see God through. That they can see God because they don't have God. The world's lost and dying. They need people that they can see God through. And these men and this nation that was going to be created over the next 400 years was the people that the world was supposed to be able to see God through. So he says, your God. And before I go to the next statement, let me back up. And these brothers, when they first got in trouble there in Egypt, when their brother Joseph was calling them spies, and they were having a conversation, verse 22 of chapter 42, and Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, meaning Joseph, and ye would not hear. Therefore, behold, also this blood is required. So these brothers are having a discussion, and they figure this hardship's come on them because of their past. And that brings up the next point. Do you let your past blind you of your blessings? They couldn't see their blessings a little later on because they was thinking about what they had done to Joseph. Well, these brothers had accepted God's gift of salvation at some point, and yet they were still living in the past. They were still thinking about what they had done to Joseph. How many times have we been here and heard Dean talk about not bringing up people's pasts? Well, let me add just a little to that. Not only are we not to bring up others' pasts, let's not bring up our own either. Because God has dealt with it. It's been washed away by His most precious blood. So therefore, why would we ever bring it up again against anybody else or ourselves? And in addition, it causes us to be blind to the blessings that God's bringing to us. These brothers couldn't see the treasure that God had for them. And one of the reasons is because they were looking at the past. And then he says, and the God of your father. What a statement. Did you know you can be a blessing to another child of God? A blessing can come to them by God through you. But in addition to that, a lost person can receive a blessing from God through you. These brothers had received a blessing even though they didn't know it. They was wondering what God had done to them. But they had received a blessing. And they couldn't see it. And they couldn't acknowledge, because they were being blessed because of who their father was, Jacob, who also started out as not a good man either. But God made a wonderful, miraculous change in Jacob's life. Even changed his name to Israel. And then these brothers were being blessed because of their brother that they didn't even know was their brother at this point. And I thought about this evening, and I thought about not mentioning it, but I'm going to go ahead and mention it. I was shown an incredible kindness on a couple of counts Saturday. And I was shown a couple of counts of kindness, a treasure, a blessing, if you will. And in addition, as well on Monday. You ever been to the supermarket? You get up there, those of you who carry a debit card, and I'd went in for just a couple of small items. And then I was asked there at the checkout by the young lady that was waiting on me. There was some stuff they had to donate. Did I want to donate? And whatever it was, I said, yeah, one. Took my debit card, put in my PIN number, nothing. Tried it a second time, nothing. And there was a reason, even though it was just two small items plus the one that was being donated, which wasn't much, I didn't have enough money in the bank. You know what that young lady did? She come around there with a card and paid for it. Well, it may have been the store, but she paid for it. She paid for it. She didn't have to do that. She paid for it. Now there I was, and I know in the grand scheme of things that's nothing big to be there at the supermarket and have insufficient funds, but it's not a pleasant experience if you've ever been there. She showed me a kindness. She blessed me. She paid for those two small items and that donated item. And then there was two other ladies that also showed me a great kindness Saturday evening. And it's much appreciated. Brought me some more stuff. And then Monday evening, I've got a brother that showed me some kindness as well, a blessing. And it's not the first time. But sometimes we don't see the blessings around us because of the circumstances we're in. We're blinded to them. When really the circumstances shouldn't matter. We need to have our eyes open, because with the two ladies that showed me kindness Saturday evening, and the lady at the checkout that showed me a kindness, and my brother that showed me a kindness, it's not, they showed me a kindness, but really, where does the kindness come from? Where does the blessing come from? Who was working through that young lady? Who was working through these two other ladies? Who was working through my brother Jake? And since I've mentioned my brother, I'll give a shout out as well to Joanne and Donna, because they're the two other ladies that showed me a kindness Saturday. But really, where did the kindness, where did the blessing come from? It came from God. God worked in and through those people. None of them had to do what they done, but they did. And it's much appreciated. And I've thought about it in the days since, and I think I even thought about it Saturday evening. I prefer much more to be in the position of the one that's doing the helping or doing the blessing. But the truth is, it's a blessing to receive the blessing too. In addition to receiving the blessing, God's way of keeping us humble, ain't it? And that's a blessing too. But he said, the God of your father. The God of your father. We can receive blessings and we can give blessings. And he says, hath given treasure in your sacks. That money wasn't lost. It hadn't been unaccounted for. It wasn't a mistake. But again, the brothers couldn't see it because they were thinking about the past. And that gets really to the point, are we paying attention? Are we paying attention to the treasures that God's bringing in our life? And what is a treasure? I thought about this as I was going through this evening. And the thought come to me, it's not always money. It's not always, it can be spending time with sweetness. That's treasure. It can come in so many different ways, but if you're blinded for whatever reason, fear, nervousness, your past, whatever it happens to be that's blinding you, you're missing, you're not paying attention. And then, of course, the last point, when you do see those blessings, are we thankful? Are we truly thankful? I think most of us here, when we receive a blessing, are definitely thankful. But to think about the blessings that God showers around, because it's not just, we tend to think of blessings as something that comes around once, every number of days, or if we was to really concentrate on it. But how many blessings do we get each and every day? How many times does God bless us each and every day? It's untold. Every time you get in your vehicle and head out someplace and you get there safe and sound, it was a blessing. Every time you make it back home, it was a blessing. If you had an argument with your spouse, it's a blessing because both of you's there. You're both safe and sound. Waking up in the morning is a blessing. Something that Daddy had said in that last year that he lived, and it was something along the lines, any morning you can get up and walk to the kitchen and make yourself a pot of coffee. It's a good morning. And, we tend to think about, again, if Publishers Clearinghouse come knocking at the door, we'd recognize that. But what a blessing it is to be around family, friends, loved ones. What a blessing it is. What a blessing it is to get in a vehicle and be able to go where you want or need to go. And what a blessing it is to be able to get on your knees and ask God for forgiveness. What a blessing it is to be able to get on your knees and just to spill your guts out, spill your heart out to God. And you say, well, God already knows all about it. Yes, He does. But He wants to hear you tell Him all about it. And what a blessing that is. What a blessing it is when it's 100 degrees outside and the sun's shining. What a blessing it is when it's 20 degrees out and it's a blizzard. I enjoy that and better myself. But it's a blessing. It's always... And for those of us that's been washed in Jesus' most holy and precious blood, what a blessing. And what a blessing now to have a relationship with God. What a blessing it is. You know, and a lot of people, and I guess we're all guilty of this, we can throw out the oh my gee. Don't do that. Try, if you have that problem, try to catch yourself and, you know, don't take His name lightly. Realize what a blessing, what a friend. We have a friend that sticketh closer than a brother, and what a blessing. And don't let fear, anxiety, your past, or anything else block you from the blessings that God's still showering us with each and every day.